The year was 1711 during the Great Northern War, and the city of Stralsund was under siege. The Swedish army had held the city against all odds for over a year. But their supplies were running low, and the enemy was closing in. The Danes, backed by a coalition of Russians, Saxons, and Prussians, had been fighting against the Swedes for years, trying to gain control of the Baltic region. Stralsund, a strategic port city, was the last stronghold held by the Swedes, and its fall would mean certain defeat. The Swedish army, led by Governor-General Magnus Stenbock, had been cut off from reinforcements and surrounded by a massive enemy force. The Danes had set up a blockade, cutting off all supplies and communication with the outside world. But Stenbock was not one to give up easily. He had his soldiers dig trenches and fortify the city walls, preparing for a long and brutal siege. The city's population was called upon to help defend their home, and every able-bodied person was put to work. The siege began in earnest on May 19, 1711, with a massive bombardment from the enemy cannons. The city was in chaos as buildings crumbled and fires broke out. The defenders fought back with their own artillery, but they were badly outnumbered and outgunned. Despite the odds against them, the Swedes held out for weeks, even launching daring raids on the enemy's encampments under cover of darkness. But as time went on, the defenders grew weaker and the enemy grew stronger. The Danes had brought in new and more powerful artillery, and their cannons pounded the city mercilessly. The defenders scrambled to repair the walls and put out fires, but it seemed like a losing battle. Food and water were running dangerously low, and disease was spreading rapidly through the crowded city. The sounds of constant gunfire and explosions echoed through the streets, and the people of Stralsund were living in constant fear. But even as the situation grew increasingly dire, Governor Stenbock refused to give up. He rallied his troops, urging them to fight on despite the overwhelming odds. "We are not alone," he cried. "Sweden has not forsaken us, and we will hold this city until the last man falls." Quote, and so they did, against all odds. The defenders of Stralsund held on for over 4 months. They fought back wave after wave of enemy attacks, and even launched a few daring counterattacks of their own. But in the end, it was not the enemy's guns but the elements that finally brought down the city's defenses. A massive storm rolled in from the sea, and the high winds and waves battered the already weakened walls and fortifications. The enemy saw their chance and launched a massive assault, pouring into the city from all sides. The defenders fought valiantly, but they were too few and too weak to hold them off any longer. In the end, Governor Stenbock and a handful of his men managed to escape by sea. But the vast majority of the city's defenders were killed or captured. The siege of Stralsund was over, and the city was annexed by the victorious Danes. But the memory of those brave defenders would live on, inspiring future generations of Swedes to stand up against overwhelming odds. And to this day, the siege of Stralsund remains one of the most epic and dramatic battles of the Great Northern War.